Hello and welcome to Geek Speak. I'm Chris and
Jonathan.
This week, because it's our first show for July, we wanted to do a kind of a recap for the biggest things from the past year. Or the past 6 months, so the biggest things this year so far. The first thing is, well, the advent of the big budget, mainstream, major studio, R-rated comic book movies, which has been now proven to be able to be successful thanks to Deadpool, despite it not being the first of its kind.
Yeah, so...
I mean, years ago they released the Watchmen movie, which was based on a graphic novel, was R-rated. The Kick-Ass and Kick-Ass 2 movies, which were both R-rated and based on comic books. I mean, Deadpool did have a massive effect, but a lot of people are saying it's the first R-rated comic book movie to be released, and it isn't. It's just the first by a major studio.
It's the first that everyone knows about anyway. In the fact that they can actually say, yep, this is definitely a comic book film.
Yeah, it got as much recognition as it did because it was made by Fox and it was linked to the X-Men series, whereas Watchmen and Kick-Ass weren't linked to anything else. They existed in their own standalone universes.
I still think they went too far with it. I don't know. I think everyone loved it, but it could have been too much for the comic book area.
I don't know. I mean, to a certain degree, they made an attempt at the Deadpool character once in Wolverine Origins, and everyone involved with that has since apologised for it, including Ryan Reynolds himself, who played the character. Because the character was known for being the merc with the mouth, and one of the biggest things they did was they sealed his mouth, which, I mean, is just stupid in and of its own, because how can he eat and drink with no mouth? But most of what people were complaining about was the fact that, because it's R-rated, he lost limbs, he made multiple references to sex, and I think there was even 1 or 2 scenes of having sex,
Yeah.
which, I mean, I don't mind that so much because it's in the character.
But I think the studio went a bit far, and that's just my opinion. Like, it did do well in the box office. It did really well in the box office, but there's got to be a line there, I think.
Yeah. Well,
especially for these comic book movies.
With Deadpool, I think Deadpool is one of those few things that you can actually go that step further, because his character, since its inception, has been like that. He's been the kind of person who will randomly spout off jokes of a sexual nature. He was always a skirt-chasing character. He was open about that. He was open about violence. He was one of the few comic book heroes in the Marvel Universe, other than Punisher, who actually killed people.
Yeah.
And this movie was as true to the character as any representation I have seen.
Just makes me think, where are they going to go next with this sort of stuff?
Well, that's the thing. Deadpool is one of the few characters in the Marvel Universe that is adult-oriented. Everyone else is more oriented at, the PG-13 area, where it's more kid-friendly, because they might make a reference to sex or relationships, but they never mention it outright or show it outright, which they have done in Deadpool.
Yeah, but also you got to be thinking, what is DC going to come out with? You know, are they going to follow suit, or are they going to stick to the whole TV series line.
Well, that kind of brings us to the second story that I wanted to talk about, which was the massive flop that was Batman vs Superman, which a lot of people consider it to be a bit of a success, as it was supposed to be the kickoff for the DC cinematic universe, but it was critically and by fan response panned. It was rubbish, and a lot of people were saying that it took the characters and it basically changed a lot of their ideologies, and one of the things that a lot of people were disappointed by was that it was cut down to a PG rating. And in the upcoming DVD release, they've said that there will be a director's cut release, which will have all of these extra content re-added to the movie, which will push it up to an R rating. And for me, I have to wonder, like, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, the three major heroes in this movie, all three of them are heroes that classically, in every other depiction, will not kill. Except Wonder Woman, who did actually kill one character in one of the comic books. But in the movie, you blatantly see Batman taking actions that would end in death. They're just not explicitly shown to have killed people. You don't see the dead bodies, you just see him doing something that you know you don't survive that.
Just goes against his whole principles, really. I mean...
Yeah, and I mean, with them saying this is the basis for their new cinematic universe, and then having a Batman that is basically a 90-degree difference from every other depiction of Batman ever put to screen or to print, except I think there was one alternate universe where Thomas Wayne became Batman and killed lots and lots of people with guns, and that was about the only other Batman that killed.
I refuse outright to watch it, just from what I've heard.
As do I,
just
simply
refuse
because...
to watch it, like, I'll never watch it.
Yeah,
As a die-hard Batman fan, it doesn't exist in my mind.
part of me wants to watch it just to see how bad it was,
Yeah.
but then again I know that afterward, like after watching it, if it's a 2 or 3 hour movie, I'm going to sit there and go, I want my time back, because it's not good. Even some of the people who were in it have said they're not coming back if they're invited to, because they just didn't like it.
Well, has DC just launched this director's cut to try and catch up to Marvel's Deadpool?
Well, some people are saying that because BVS did come out just after Deadpool, and they're arguing that it's going to be the first, like, R-rated DC movie, despite the fact that in all technicality it's only being R-rated in this director's cut, whereas the upcoming Batman the Killing Joke animated movie is going to be R-rated from the get-go.
And they had so many characters they could use. They've got Deathstroke and...
Yeah, well, in this movie the two bad guys were Lex Luthor and Doomsday. And they really misused both of them. I mean, Doomsday is the ultimate killing machine of the DC universe, and they really didn't use him nearly as well as he could have been. It would have been better if they'd used a lesser villain and then waited until they've established the full DC universe and then brought Doomsday in as...
the holy...
yeah.
bringer of doom.
As, like, they could use Doomsday almost the way that Marvel is using Thanos.
Pretty much, yeah.
Except for the fact that Doomsday isn't as smart, but he's still as big of a threat.
This whole concept design, though, is actually pretty brilliant. I think.
Even in the different versions, the one thing that stays with him is that he can never be beaten by the same method twice, because he will adapt so that it no longer works on him.
Yeah, it's quite good. So what else have we got this week?
Well, one of the other big things that came out in the last 6 months, I want to turn more towards the game side of things, and really if you're wanting to talk about big games that came out, there weren't really that many original properties, but there was 2 new entries to a relatively new genre, which was the first-person style battle arenas, which were Overwatch and Battleborn. And while Battleborn was more of a team shooter thing, Overwatch was definitely more of a first-person MOBA with shooting mechanics. And, I mean, both of these have been enormous from the get-go. Personally, they're not really my thing, so I haven't played them, but I've heard a lot about them, a lot of very positive things.
Well, unfortunately I haven't heard much about them, so I don't know much, honestly, in the way of them 2 titles. So
yeah, I mean,
sorry about that.
Both of them have come out from fairly well-known, big-name and respected studios, with Battleborn coming out from 2K Games, the makers of the very successful Borderlands series, and with Overwatch coming out under the Blizzard title, which most of us should know are the force behind the StarCraft, Warcraft, and Diablo franchises, and their various offshoots of Hearthstone and Heroes of the Storm, and now adding this into it,
they're establishing a franchise.
Yeah,
beyond the World of Warcraft now. They're starting to branch out.
Yeah, originally they started off with Warcraft, which was supposed to be a Warhammer Fantasy Battles based game, but they couldn't get the licensing for that from Games Workshop, so they just made it Warcraft instead of Warhammer. And then they released Warcraft 2, and when they did Warcraft 3, they also released StarCraft, and they had Diablo and Diablo 2 come out relatively close. And then they did World of Warcraft, which, if you haven't heard of World of Warcraft, you've been living under a rock for the last decade.
Yeah.
And from there, they're basically dipping their toe into everything, and because of Blizzard's stance of we'll release it when it's ready, and we'll keep going we'll keep support active for it until people stop playing it. I mean,
very popular.
Yeah, Blizzard does things well. I mean, you look at some of their older games, you can still buy and play Warcraft 1.
It's just brilliant. I many occasions have gone back to the old Warcraft games. They're just fantastic. Like, they're just timeless, I think.
Yeah. I mean, even if you look at something like StarCraft, which is over a decade old now,
it's still a classic.
Yeah, it's still played competitively in some places.
It had a decent storyline. It was just the works, I think, actually,
Yeah.
for its time.
I mean, you look at stuff like today, like League of Legends, Dota 2, even Overwatch. All of them can be traced back to Blizzard, because the whole MOBA genre, the multiplayer online battle arena that LoL and League of Legends, Dota 2, Smite come from, it started out as a mod for a multiplayer map on Warcraft 3 called Defense of the Ancients. Yeah. So now with Blizzard going into Overwatch and basically taking that multiplayer online battle arena and making it a first-person shooter as well, they've tied elements of Dota and something like Counter-Strike or Team Fortress or COD, and they've had the heroes from the MOBAs, the game types that you often see in both MOBAs and shooters, and they've combined them into one game that is, well, it's really a genre of its own, and it's going to spawn a lot of copycats.
As they always do.
Yeah, I mean, all of these games that I mentioned, half of them would not exist if it wasn't even for, say, StarCraft and Warcraft 3, which were the first games to really generate that big of a competitive multiplayer base, that they were the origins of esports.
Well, you look at Dawn of War 2, Dawn of War series, that's all tied into it as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Like, that's where that comes from.
you wouldn't have real-time strategy games like that have that mix of base building without stuff like Warcraft or Command and Conquer.
Yeah, Command and Conquer was the roots as well.
Yeah.
They did well too.
And now the last big thing that that we wanted to mention was like big events in comic books, obviously. And really in comics this year there's only really been two really big events. One was particular to a single story and a single character's story arc, and the other was the DC Rebirth event, where, as DC has had a habit of doing over the years, they took a pile of their previous multiversal universe, and they scrapped it in favour of a new one. So they had some sort of massive cataclysmic event that disrupted the multiverse, and then they restarted all of their comic book lines from a single point, which was the DC Rebirth, and that happened in the beginning of June.
Wibbly wobbly, tiny whiny stuff.
Yeah, they basically had a massive event that ended all of the current ongoing storylines of the universe at the end of May and started with the Rebirth storylines at the beginning of June. And that started with Batman Rebirth, Wonder Woman Rebirth, all their biggest lines, and some of the smaller lines that were getting new stories for the first time in years. And it was a massive shake-up for the DC universe, with some lesser-known characters that had like overflown into their universe, basically getting wiped off and pushed to the side so they can start with a clean slate. Which I think is brilliant for them. It
sets a different tone, like, it just does. I think sometimes in DC you gotta look at it and you gotta say, we need something new. Like,
yeah, well, when you've got characters like Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman, who each had their own individual comics, and then also had Justice League comics, and they'd be doing something in the Justice League comic where they'd be, for example, there was one issue a few years ago where in the same month worth of comic releases and which took up the same time frame in the comic universe, they had a bunch of the Justice League members, including the Holy Trinity of Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, going off to another planet and fighting some evil that was threatening Earth from that planet for a number of weeks. But at the same time that story is going on in the Justice League comics, all three of them in their own individual comics were doing other stuff on Earth. And this was all supposed to be in the one version of Earth. And it didn't work. Which was why in the past, because they had all these writers who were all doing their separate stories without any overarching sense of continuity for the whole line. And using these events, they've been cutting that down so that it's less titles being released, less differing stories, so that they can have, if one character, like if Batman goes to Metropolis for something and he interacts with Superman, they'll have that, or they'll have mention of that in the Superman comic for that time period. If the Justice League has some massive world-threatening encounter that they have to deal with, that will be reflected in all the other comic books that are coming out in that time period, which is something the Marvel Universe has been doing for a while, but the DC Universe has been struggling with somewhat.
I think it'll help bring those crossovers in a lot better for
Yeah.
the DC Universe. I mean, I love crossovers myself,
Yeah.
so...
I also think it'll be a great help for new readers, because by doing these Rebirth series, they're not redoing over the origins of the characters, because these days you can find the origin of a character in 30 seconds with a Google search. What they're doing is they're just saying, okay, this is a kicking off point. Everything new goes from here onwards. We're not doing any long continuing storylines that have been going for the last year and a half. We're ending all of them, they're all getting rounded up. We're starting all new storylines so that new readers can come in and just pick it up and go.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay,
Not much to say than that, eh? That's pretty good.
Yeah, there's not much more to say on that, but if you've got something to say about one of these stories, or if you think we've missed something, something
By all
massive in the
means.
last 6 months, by all means, let us know in the comments or on our Facebook page or
Just
via
anywhere.
our email. We'd love to hear from you. As always, if you've got any ideas for us to talk about or anything you want us to say,
Shoot us an email.
yeah,
Mate, if it needs to be private, you know,
yeah, just
I'm happy with that.
so to wrap up this week's episode, we'll just do our usual recommendations. For myself, I'm currently reading a light novel that I think is absolutely brilliant. It's about a character who has been reincarnated into a magical world, and he still has all of his memories from his previous world. It is called Mushoku Tensei, which I think roughly translates to reincarnated genius. I'm not 100% certain on that, so don't quote me. But if you can find the English translation of that, definitely pick it up and give it a read. It's well worth it.
I'd have to say my recommendation for the week is the Fate Stay Night series, Ultimate Blade Works. It centres around, I don't know if you're watching this and you haven't seen any of the Fate series, but they all centre around the Holy Grail War. It's very exciting, very good watch if you're into it.
Yeah, it has a lot of very interesting characters and a lot of very interesting historical information as well.
I've finally gotten around to it.
that.
It's been on my to watch list for about, I don't know, a year or 2 years, and
Yeah.
I'm finally doing it.
It's been on my watch list for a while too. I just keep getting distracted with new release anime.
Yeah, that's always the case.
Yeah. Well, thanks for watching, and we hope to see you next week.